Welcome back to Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. I'm your host, Ryan, and today we're going to be kind of covering a culmination of a lot of the topics that we've discussed so far here on the channel or on the show. And of course, typically the shows encompassed a lot of different topics from various different subject areas, spirituality, philosophy, physics, right? So today I'm trying to bridge them all into kind of one thing, and I think that even pop culture actually gives us a lot of references to a theme like this. So the main concept is the unified field, which is almost this energy field created by all living things, right? And this ties into magnetism and electromagnetism or electricity and whatnot. And Einstein was working on this right before he passed. It was a work that was kind of incomplete. And I think that this unified field concept is hinted at a lot in various different forms of, I guess you would say, pop culture or art or cinema in film industry. So even in things like Star Wars, we have this concept of the Force, right? What is the Force? It's it's an energy field created by all things in the cosmos, right? And it's invisible. It's all around you. How does Yoda describe it? It surrounds us and penetrates us and binds the galaxy together, right? So, or maybe that was how Obi-Wan described it. But in any case, it's this kind of concept which is, I guess, laid out across all areas of not just cinema, but also art, physics, and all these different subject areas. So we kind of have this reoccurring theme of this unified field concept. So obviously Star Wars is a bit of an extreme representation of how it can be used, levitate objects, use the Force in all these different ways. But we are starting to come across some very interesting stuff in the realm of physics and science these days in terms of exploration of the cosmos and what that really means for our understanding of the natural world, seeing as that's what science is typically supposed to be, right? But it's interesting because sometimes you have phenomenon that goes on that typically can't be explained by science. It'll be a one-off or some rare occurring instance of phenomenon which they can replicate, and then it'll just be discarded because part of science, or how science evaluates stuff, is what's called the scientific method, meaning it's reproducible, it's falsifiable, you're able to essentially replicate the results over and over again. And if you've ever done anything repetitive in life, you know that every time you do it, even though it might be similar, it's not exactly the same, right? So for instance, I always talk about going to the gym on this channel. Going to the gym, you might do the same workout, you might do the same exercises, you might do it in the same time, but you might not feel the same way as you do it. You might have a different experience doing the exact same thing the exact same way, with the exact same amount of time, right? So the point is that there is almost these unseen effects or non-physical effects which are not always replicatable in various instances, and there's almost this current of energy that surrounds these things that makes it unique to that specific situation and makes it the one time it will come around and it's actually authentic in that experience in that way. So again, that doesn't mean something when you're doing something it can't be replicated to a degree, but it's never going to be exactly the same as what I'm getting at, which is why I think a lot of science is, I wouldn't this is probably going to tick off a lot of people who are watching this for the science aspect, by why science is flawed in a lot of instances. And the physicists of the community and the scientists will be what does this guy know, blah 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 blah. But they would have to agree that even by their metric of measuring things, that the results of what they're doing are never exactly the same, which is why they have the scientific method in the first place. There's always various instances where variables are slightly off produce a different result, and that changes like the whole dynamic of whatever experiment they're trying to conduct, right? We've talked about wave function collapse. We've talked about maybe we could actually pull up the first image. We talked about wave function collapse. We talked about the observer phenomenon. We've talked about what's the word called, wave particle duality. So how the particle behaves differently and the wave function behaves differently depending on who's looking at it and how they're looking at it and what the energy observing it is projecting outwards. And if I've actually talked about this a lot with my friends outside of the show lately about this concept of the simulation theory. And if we are living in something that resembles some kind of simulation, maybe it's not like the Matrix where everything's like completely robotic or in code, but maybe if that's a piece of it, then this is an element to what happens with that what you're projecting outwards is maybe not exactly what you get back, but it's in some form. So I think this is a lot of actually what is talked about, where people are talking about like manifestation or vibrational alignment or whatever, all these new agey principles, right, of manifesting or whatever, that the universe is almost like a mirror, so you have to assume this like positive state. I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. I think that there are barriers in the subconscious which can be altered by repetition of like affirmation, and you can direct your focus towards those things. But I don't think that pretending or acting a certain way, like being happy all the time, will just make you happy. I don't believe like it's 1 + 1 = 2. I think it's, if you see something that is a recurring pattern within yourself, within your subconscious, something that makes you unhappy, like you should almost like request to yourself in some form, like that you are able to confront that like face to face and then get to the root of whatever is causing that thing, right? So, again, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's more like, it's almost more like watching a plant grow, in which like if something is going on with the root of the plant, which is causing like some sickness in the plant, or the plant to grow in some odd way that's not supposed to, then it needs to be fixed at the root, right? So just like directing the plant to like keep growing in the same way that it's going is not going to fix a problem. Anyway, the reason why I kind of draw these analogies is because when we talk about something like the unified field, and this is actually something that I came to the conclusion of many years ago, is actually probably around the same time as everybody was like going through their like hold up in COVID, of all of us being like locked indoors and not being able to do anything really. So I was just like studying a lot of science during that time, a lot of different fields in terms of understanding the cosmos and whatnot. But one of the main things that I came to the conclusion of is all of like the various fields in science, neuroscience, biology, chemistry, physics, they're all interwoven, not just within the human body, but within the cosmos itself, right? So sometimes people even draw the analogy to, like Earth being like a big, some kind of organism that we're living on, right? And we're all contributing in some way to that organism, and the sun is also like part of this dynamic, as well as the solar system as a whole. But I think that with that being the case, we are essentially merging all these different areas together, energy, light, blah, 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 to have all these different functions. Photosynthesis is not just some product of biology, but it's also a product of chemistry. It's also a product of physics, which sunlight is breaking the bonds of carbon dioxide and oxygen to allow them to basically form food for themselves, right, or grow. So again, the point is that there's a lot of different processes that go on, and you can't look at one field of science and say, okay, I suddenly know the whole picture, because it only gives you a piece of the picture, right? So that is pretty much my little rant there on understanding what we're going to go into today. So here, of course, we have wave. So this is, I guess, kind of self-explanatory given what I said about wave function collapse. You have waves, which are kind of like the almost medium in which all things travel in the cosmos. Everything communicates with vibration, as we actually heard in a past episode by Dr. Bruce Lipton, who has done extensive research into the field of epigenetics and whatnot. So all these guys who actually study this stuff actually have a pretty, I guess, extensive awareness on a concept of some kind of unified field of energy that exists slightly, like, I wouldn't even say that exists outside of us. It interpenetrates, or some word I'm looking for that maybe is a synonym to that. But it's interwoven. That's the word I'm looking for. It's interwoven into all of us, and it really kind of helps all things develop in some way. It helps your consciousness develop. It helps your body regenerate skin cells. It helps your emotions function. It helps your mental state change. So all of these are really just aspects of this unified field, playing this almost this big symphony of the cosmos, right? So again, waves, very basic in the sense of what they represent. They represent energy in motion traveling through some kind of medium. And I would say that in terms of understanding the cosmos as a whole, this is very fundamental actually to this part, because when you have something like this occurring, when you have a wave moving through a medium, you have energy moving through space, you have energy moving through air, but it acts differently depending on the medium. So, for example, you can't hear sound in a vacuum, right? But you can hear sound on Earth because there's a medium of air there that it is pushing against, right? It's breaking something, and when you break that barrier, it's called breaking the sound barrier, and you get a sonic boom, right? So you get a big release of energy because the speed or the impact of which that wave is occurring against a medium is greater than the force that the medium would push against that energy. So, but in a vacuum where there is no force pushing against that, then you don't have that same effect. Will you excuse me for a second? Sorry about that, my friends. I had to take a little intermission there for a sec. So yeah, what I was saying about like the waves traveling through a medium, essentially this is the reason why everything acts differently in terms of energy. Are we able to get the picture back up? Thanks, buddy. So again, it acts different in air, acts different in water. So as we know, fish actually communicate with echolocation. So I think that, and bats do the same thing in air medium, whatnot. So I think this principle is actually very imperative to communication as a whole across the cosmos. And I think just because, for example, in a vacuum where there is no medium for it to travel in, doesn't mean that energy is not traveling. It means that it's still traveling, but it can't be heard because it's not pushing against a medium. So it's almost like for example, radio waves, right? Radio waves appear to be not pushing against a medium because they're not very high intensity, right? Which is why we can just tune into them on a dial, right? And there's no really effect that we can pick up, but they're still there. We don't detect it pushing against the air medium. So it's the same effect in space, and I really think that, if there are like intelligent life forms out there, then they would probably operate on this kind of concept. And I think our soul is receptive to a lot of these concepts as well. This kind of energetic tuning fork kind of phenomenon, if you want to say. And I think that the reason why this is so imperative is because if you think about it, sound is a thing that kind of affects all other forces around that. I'm going to take a sip of water again here. Yeah, I'm having this like shortness of breath today, guys, so maybe I'll just like slow it down a little bit. But so sound, if you want to think of it, it can also affect things like magnetic fields, which I would say is almost the energy that is right below sound, and the one that is right below that would be electricity. And we've come to think of electromagnetism as one force, but it was not always thought about as one force. And I think that with that, we can see where sound waves affect things. If you, for example, if you have a large amplitude sound wave going into a medium, it can disrupt or make a magnetic field fluctuate. Magnetic fields can deflect charged particles, and sound waves therefore can rip away like things from some kind of medium, like the nucleus of the atom or whatever. If it's strong enough, it could create ions and whatnot. So the sound wave shock wave effect is really something that occurs all throughout the cosmos. It's a almost universal constant, if you want to say. Light is really the only form of energy or form of like any kind of substance or whatever that is beyond that. So yeah, but it kind of gets somewhat complicated in terms of vibrational energy encoded with light. We're talking about really, I would say, not uncomplicated ideas here when it comes to understanding a lot of these things. And perhaps I'm not explaining it the best as well because, again, I'm still learning about this myself, so I can only explain it in the sense that I would be able to understand it with. Maybe we'll go to the next image, actually. So, like, for example, this is like what a magnetic field traditionally looks like. But if you see at the two sides of the magnetic field, it looks like the ripple effect of a sound wave, but it looks like they're meeting in a central point and being emitted constantly from one point. And it's kind of interesting because physics, again, says like, monopoles is something we haven't discovered that exists or whatever. But a magnetic field is almost like a resonance or sound field, but it's met in like a central unified part, which keeps the energy recirculating around the object. So it's almost like this self-sustaining pressurized field that emits forces on both sides. And I think that force that is reoccurring throughout the this kind of like circulation process is that force which is projected outwards. And I don't know if I'm explaining this too well, but essentially what I'm saying is like if I bang my hand on the table and it creates a shock wave, it's like boom, that energy is gone, right? But if you have something like a magnetic field, which like I guess the main difference in this is it's like receptive only to things that are metal in a sense, or primarily useful on only things that are metal, is that this field is reoccurring in the sense where the energy is looping around and it's in a constant motion, so the energy is not leaving anywhere. The force is constant, where sound is very dispersive. You hit something, makes a sound, sound's gone, right? So it's the way the energy is almost manipulated in the medium, right? And I think that that's why metal and magnetism, why they have this like kind of conjoined concept together, where magnetism is only receptive to things that are metal, because metal, as we know, is a conductor. It lets things flow freely, like electricity and whatnot. It's not an insulator like wood. So you have these concepts, right? And I think that with this being said, we can kind of start to understand like why magnetism affects things in certain ways, why sound affects things in certain ways, and what actually like lets these forces or lets these forms of energy translate into one another. Why one is stable and just recirculating and it seems almost very passive, it's invisible, you can't really detect it if something metal is not near it. And then why sound is something that it's like something everybody hears, right? It's how we communicate. If you hear something in an environment, loud sound far away, everybody's like looks up to want to know what that noise is, right? But it's something instinctive to sensory perception, right? So same thing with electricity. That's how, like, you know, the body communicates. Every time you have a thought, every time you your body is doing anything, every time you're moving your hands like I'm doing here while I'm talking, or anytime you're forming words, or anytime any bodily process is going on, that's electric movement going on in the system, right? So again, you can almost see that magnetism is a force in between these two things. It's in between sound, which is something that is just in itself. It doesn't have a positive or negative. And then you have magnetic fields, which have a north and a south, but they always go together. They're never separated. And then you have electric charges at the level below that, or you have electricity below magnetism. And electricity, you have positive and negative, but they don't have to always be together. They can be separate from one another. So you can kind of see how it goes like almost unified, where it's just sound, and then unified, but the two go together, and then separate, where you can have the two together or you can have the two apart. So this is kind of the tapestry of the cosmos, these three elements, I would say. So maybe we'll go on to the next image now, but this is almost like the concept of what you would have as some kind of baseline, right? Like that surrounds the Earth and whatnot, protects us from charged particles, etc., etc. So reoccurring force, always there, changes over time, maybe very minusculely. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but in any case. So here we see the kind of the spiral motion, and you know, we have something that almost looks like what you would see in hypnotism, or in some form of I guess entrancement in a sense, right? And I think that the thing that I was really trying to get with this, and you know, the reason why I have numbers here is not to show necessarily time travel. It could show time travel, but the main thing that I was getting at is almost this focal point of causal loop, in a sense. Not a temporal causal loop, but a causal loop in the sense where, let's say you decide, okay, I want to do something fun today, and maybe you like to play a certain sport, and you go and do that sport, and then you start enjoying yourself while you're playing that sport, and you start to encounter other things which are on the same level of enjoyment as that thing. So, you know, let's say you're playing a sport, and you know, you're playing like, I don't know, some game, badminton, for example, whatever, you know, in the gym, and you know, playing competitively or whatever, and you're having fun, and then you run into some friends while you're there that and then you start having good conversation, and then they jump in the game, and now you're having even more fun, and then you start to have other thoughts and experiences that are also on that same level of fun. So it's almost like fun was the starting point, and then you continue on that line of thought indefinitely, because you're continuing at the same energy, or you're still continuing to move in that same direction of energy, right? And I think when it comes to life, this is really the focal point of how things operate, right? For example, you wake up in the morning, and then you do whatever. Some people check their phones, some people meditate, some people think about all the things they have to do in a day. I don't know, etc. Right? For me, I meditate when I get up, right? And I feel like that helps set the tone for the day. Some people, go for a run, they exercise, whatever. I feel like that is also a form of doing that. But the point is that you're moving in some form in the direction of energy that you want to move in. So with that being said, I think the point that I'm trying to get at here is that energy in motion is almost like the element of inertia that's talked about in physics. An object, or in this case a force or energy in motion, will remain in motion unless acted on by an outside force, right? And the reason why that is somewhat dampened here on Earth, or hindered in some form, is because, again, we have mediums around us. We have air. So it's not like inertia doesn't work on Earth. It's just that we're pushing against another medium. So that force that you're emitting has to be greater than whatever the pushback force is from the medium. Just as Newton talked about, was it third law or whatever? Every action has an equal or opposite reaction. Same thing, every force has an equal or opposite force. Gravity comes down, and then you have the normal force that pushes you up, right? I would say the normal force is maybe not the best example, but in any case, that's an opposing force, right? So you get the idea. In this case here, you have a medium, almost similar to a vacuum, in which the energy just continues infinitely unless it's pushed against. So I think when it comes to consciousness and the whole way, people talk about I want to manifest this, or I want to get in this vibration, or do whatever, is the same principle, in the sense that you have to move in that direction, but you have to continually move in that direction at the same rate or greater rate. So you either have to be moving at the same velocity, or you have to be accelerating to a greater point from that initial velocity. And I'm reminded of this quote that I was actually listening to from these self-development coaches or whatever, and I was saying, actually no, maybe it was from Goggins actually, but I don't remember, but I think it was on a video with Goggins, but it was saying that there's a cure, essentially that there's a cure to all your problems in life, but the catch is the cure only works one day at a time. So for example, if you want to get in shape, getting in shape only works if you go to the gym every day, or you keep going to the gym on a consistent schedule. Eating right, getting your health better, that only works if you eat right every day, or you put effort into adopting that lifestyle change, right? Same thing with anything else, right? You're building, I don't know, some kind of business. It's always going to perform better if you work on it every day. Maybe you don't work on it every day, but maybe you have a consistent schedule that you work on it on, right? Maybe you take the weekends off or whatever, you work on it 5 days a week, right? So that's your regimen. You do the 5 days, then you take 2 days off, 5 days, take 2 days off, 5 days, take 2 days off. But the point is that you're in that energy loop, If you start doing, 3 days here, 5 days here, 2 days here, 1 day, whatever, it throws off this vibration. So you can't essentially have this effect that goes on where the energy is cycling and it's in a loop that is consistent, and the loop keeps going around and it keeps pushing you forward. And that essentially will not happen if you do not keep the same momentum, right? There's that word of momentum. So in any case, this is the principle I'm talking about here. And I think that when it comes to sound in particular, it's the same concept, right? You have energy traveling through a medium, but the sound is typically constant, right? Like, I mean, yeah, sure, you bang your hand on the table and then the sound like travels and then it goes away, but that sound is still traveling at the same rate through the medium. I mean, it's just that the air is pushing against it too. If I was to bang my hand in a vacuum, but you could hear it, but there was still no air, that sound would travel infinitely and you would continue to hear it, right? So I know I talked about this before on the show when we were talking about like the solar system and the sun and whatnot, that essentially the sun, because it's a big ball of plasma, is emitting so much energy that it is vibrating or reverberating space-time, but we can't hear it because, again, it's a vacuum, right? So it's similar to why we can hear lightning. Lightning discharges on Earth and we can hear it because there's air. If lightning were to travel in a vacuum in space, we couldn't hear it. So in any case, that's a principle, that if you keep energy consistently moving at the same rate, then you will move in that direction of energy. And I think that is the same thing for everything in life. Almost like people say positive thinking. Yeah, there is something to that. If you think positive thoughts, you will think other positive thoughts, and you'll continue to think thoughts on that same level of energy. If you think negative thoughts, same thing happens. You know, it's often made the analogy to downward spiral in life, upward spiral in life, right? You know, he started drinking, then he had family problems, then he lost his job, and then blah, 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 right? You know, and then his business failed. And then, you know, he decided he wanted to change his life. He started going to the gym more. You know, he got a great relationship. He started making more money. And then, you know, blah, blah, blah. He became a successful businessman, whatever, right? So it's the same kind of concepts here. And the point is that you can take whichever one you want, but again, it only works if you apply the energy day after day. So that's kind of the key concept out of all this. You have to keep applying that same amount of energy. And yeah, I know that some days you're not going to be able to do things the same way, but the point is that you have the intention to do it the same way. The only thing that really determines that energy output is your intention behind it, right? So if you go into something and aim to do it the same way you've always done it, you will at least perceive to have the same results around it, right? But if you like say, okay, well, you know, I'm just going to throw up my hands today and say whatever, and I'm not going to do whatever I possibly can do, then, you know, you're not going to get the same energy out of that because you don't have the same intention behind it, right? I think a lot of times in the realm of physicality, we start to get too caught up with this sense of, oh, well, you know, I felt this way about the day, or, you know, I didn't see this result or whatever. It's not really about the result, because like when you focus on the result, you don't get the one you want. But if you focus on what you are doing in the present moment, in the sense of what can I do right now, right here, right now, and you always operate with that same intention of, like, let's say, I don't know, say you don't feel like going to the gym or whatever, you know, but you still go anyway, and you still have the same intention behind why you're doing it or whatever, then you will end up putting out that same energy into the field regardless. So, you know, sometimes you go to the gym and you don't feel like it, or you don't feel very good that day, and you go to the gym with the intention of be better that you go with every time, and you leave the gym feeling better, right? So it's 1 + 1 = 2 in some cases in the cosmos, right? In any case, we'll move on to the next image. I've ranted too much on that point. So here you got this aspect of, you know, what almost looks like the bending of space-time, like we've seen with like wormholes and black holes and whatnot, or white holes as well. I think this bending effect is really representational of the way our consciousness operates, because if you really look into it, we operate a lot like one of these hyperspatial tunnels, right? Where do our thoughts come from? They come out of pure nothing. They come out of pure like vacuum energy of like no energy. They come from like absolute I don't know, void or whatever, right? They come from absolute like 0 point energy essentially, or come from the field if you want to say, right? They come from the force, right? So I don't know, if you have this concept that these things are coming out of nothing, and with that you are this instrument which is able to pull these things out of nothing, you can not only send things back there that you do not wish, but you can also pull things from there that you wish, right? And you essentially become this bridge to some like higher force, right? And I think like a lot of times a man can accomplish anything when he realizes that he's a part of something bigger. And you know, I mean that in the sense of like, you know, a lot of things in spirituality would almost parallel this concept of like human beings in their own respective experience being like God to a point, right? Where essentially you are the one who is connected to all the events that transpire in your experience, right? And I think that when you realize that maybe you are not him in the sense that you are that creator, but you are the bridge in which that creative force moves through, and as well as the destructive force that does the opposite, you become this bridge that has the ability to essentially make your experience what you want. And I'm not saying it's straightforward, like, you know, maybe there's beings out there who have figured out actually how this stuff works. I know I haven't, and I put quite a lot of time into kind of contemplating these various phenomenons, let's say, of the cosmos or of consciousness, right? I think what this also kind of represents is this aspect of, you know, simulation, if you want to say. You know, we know from science that left brain, the logical analytical side, it operates very much like a computer system to a degree, ones and zeros, on and off. And it's actually showed that the gene expression operates a lot like that as well, right? And a lot of our DNA is actually considered junk DNA. This is what they term it, junk DNA. That's why I'm using the mini quotes, or I guess regular quotes. But in a sense, you have almost this programming inside you, inside your blood, inside your gene, and you have these epigenetic switches, what they're called. And again, you could look into this book. Well, I'm not going to advertise actually on this channel. No one's getting any free advertising here on this channel, but Bruce Lipton, he's the guy you can look into for that. I'm not going to advertise his book, though. So unless he wants to come on the show and promote it himself, then then he's welcome to do that. But essentially, it's this concept that you can turn on and off or influence these epigenetic switches that control the genome expression. And it's actually scientifically proven now that things like meditation and various forms of subconscious reprogramming, like Psych-K, like neuro-linguistic programming, like hypnosis, like biofeedback, trying to think of the others, all these various forms, holographic repatterning, another one. All these various forms of subconscious reprogramming modalities can actually influence the gene expression to turn on or off. So it doesn't mean that you flip a switch and suddenly now you have, like, you know, purple eyes instead of blue, or, you know, white hair instead of black. But it's more in the sense that through time, through, like, that practice of doing that over and over and over again, maybe you can turn off stuff that was inherently part of your DNA that did not serve you. Say you have a lineage of people in your family that have stroke or diabetes or heart attack or whatever. You could turn that off. You could say that, okay, well, that's not serving me to have that in my bloodstream or in my genome expression, so you could just turn off that switch, right? And that is, according to science, this is perfectly doable, actually, because if what they've researched and what they've said is true, what the studies have shown is true, that meditation can affect the epigenetic switches of the genome, then there's no reason why you cannot do that. And in my experience, I believe that anything you can think or imagine, you can make into reality. So turning off a genome expression that is going to hinder your ability to express yourself fully or express yourself in the way that you want is not out of reason. And then you could do stuff to actually improve your health too. Maybe you can turn on genome expressions to actually produce more antioxidants in your blood, or de-age, or prevent all different forms of virus or infection or whatever, right? Why is it some people hang around sick people and then they get sick, and why some people hang around sick people and they don't catch anything, right? What determines that? It's whether you're receptive to that energy. It's like north and south on the magnet. If you don't have the opposite pole, you can't attract that thing, right? And again, this is where it comes back into magnetism, and these other forces are these determining factors that supersede all of these things, that can supersede biology, supersede, the very fundamental essences of our reality. So again, that's kind of this ones and zeros aspect to viewing the world. And the funny thing is, I've said this to a few friends, and I actually encourage anybody watching to actually try this. Just contemplate the notion that everything you see around you might not even be real. Everything you see around you might not even be real. I'm going to say that one more time. Everything you see around you might not even be real. And if you do a task with that on your mind, I guarantee you will almost perform that task better. Every task that I was performing that day when I was just constantly thinking this, I performed it better. Why? Because I realized, at least maybe at a subconscious level, that if everything I see around me is not even real, then why would any of the limiting factors that would impede us from performing the task how we would like it to be done be real either? It wouldn't be, right? So there's no reason why you couldn't do that exactly how you intended to. In any case, my point is that if we are in some form of a simulation, even if a simulation is only part of it, or part of our biology or part of our experience, whatever, then there's a way to utilize that to assist yourself, right? Doesn't mean you're like a computer now that you go beep boop and you only know 1 + 1 = 2, and you only know how to compile information and you don't know how to think for yourself. Doesn't mean that. It means that you have an understanding that there's on and offs within your system, and you can toggle those switches to adjust your system to function in a specific way. In any case, let's move on to the next image. This is a pretty interesting episode for me. So here again we have this concept of ripples or sound waves moving through some kind of medium, but this is almost like a cosmic representation of this, where you have like the sound waves traveling through something like water or something like air, or in this case almost like what looks like the cosmos, and this rippling effect again, like even if it can't be heard with like normal sensory perception, it's still there, it's still moving, it's still energy, nothing has changed. The only thing you have the absence of is some kind of medium, but in itself kind of space is a medium. It's just not very It doesn't really have anything in it. It's a vacuum, which has the absence of something, but the absence of something might actually still be something. So I think it's similar to, actually, if you were to contemplate, if something fell into a void, like a black hole or whatever, did that thing really ever fall in? Was that energy ever really in movement? Because where did it go, and what did the energy do, right? I think it's the same principle for when you have sound in a vacuum. Just because you have sound in a medium in which it can't be detected by typical sensory perception, it doesn't mean that energy is not in movement, right? It doesn't mean that something is not being translated or transformed or transmuted or projected or transferred. That was the other T word I was looking for. Transferred into some other form, right? Even if it's across empty space, which in a sense is still somewhat of a medium, even though it has the absence of what science would call mediums. But in any case, I would say it's a less receptive medium than air or whatever. In any case, when you have this effect, it's almost like, I would say it's almost something that can't be detected by senses, as I said. But again, consciousness or energy does not lie. Sometimes senses do. It's going back to making Star Wars references. If you've ever seen A New Hope, when Obi-Wan hands Luke the helmet that has a black shield on, you can't see anything. And what does he tell Luke? He tells him that your senses can deceive you, don't trust them, right? Or your eyes can deceive you, don't trust them, right? So, and then he tells him reach out with his feelings, right? And this is the thing. And then, you see him deflect the blaster bolts or whatever, and he's like, see, you can do it. So the point of that is that energy is still there, but we've trained ourselves to only believe or operate based on what we see or what we can determine with our senses is real, what we can hear, what we can see, what we can touch, what we can taste, what we can smell. Those are all physical senses. But what you can sense when you're sitting still and it's perfect quiet, or there's no disruption in your concentration and you're just listening. You're listening almost the concept of listening for a sound that is not even there. That is actually one of the ways that you can probably meditate on nothing the best. If you say that, if you act as if you're sitting in a space and you're listening for a sound that is supposed to be playing, but the sound, of course, is never going to play because there is no sound. But if you act like there's something that you're supposed to listen into, you're focusing, listening, being receptive to energy, right? So that's the concept here. The concept is that you're listening or being receptive to something which you are not actually going to perceive. Well, that is the concept of this type of concentration. But in essence, what we're talking about here is being receptive to the energy. Being receptive without your senses. Don't rely on what you see. Use all your senses. So I guess that sums up that. We'll move on to the last picture here as we sum up. So here we have the nebula, which is, we can kind of look at and see that this is really what is our cosmos is made up of. All of the universe as we know it, all of the galaxy as we know it, all of the solar system as we know it is made up of these things. And this particularly is a picture of a nebula, but essentially nebulas are probably one of the most fundamental and beautiful things in the cosmos, and they represent a lot of different aspects of this expression or this authenticity or this energy and movement in the cosmos. They're formed out of gas and stars and whatnot, but they're luminous parts of the cosmos made up of energy, right? Also, what does Master Yoda say to Luke when he's telling him about moving the ship or whatever? He's saying that luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. So essentially we come from this stuff, right? We come from nebulas and stars and supernova remnants and whatnot. Who knows what else? Gamma ray bursts and all this stuff are actually part of us. So we might just be fallout of whatever that matter is. So I think that we have a great opportunity of exploration if we can only figure out how to go about it. So, and I think that that's unique to each individual. I can't tell anybody how to go on an expansive journey for themselves, because only they will know how to go about doing that, just as I will be the only one who knows how to go about doing that for myself. So yeah, I don't know. That was a lot of talking. I'm actually pretty exhausted in terms of talking today. I know this was a shorter episode, but I don't know. This was a big concept, actually. I was kind of out of breath before I actually got here, but in any case, nebulas are something that I would say is almost one of the representational aspects of this medium in its full beauty or full radiance or full perfection. So if you look at these, you can kind of see how everything kind of culminates together, and it doesn't really operate like maybe move like some kind of well-playing symphony. So again, we've covered sound, we've covered magnetism, we've covered electricity, we covered the unified field theory, we've covered quite a bit. We covered the force as well in various instances in which it's been beneficial to draw analogies to. So yeah, as always, I encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment below anything you enjoyed or found interesting. You can interact with me below. Let me know what type of content you would like to see in the future. Let me know if you like these medium, I would say, length formats, or if you would prefer longer or shorter, whatnot. You can let me know all that in the comment section below as well. I encourage you to follow me on Instagram at @top_sorcerer. I would say that if you enjoy this type of content, you could check out my other channel, Sword of Mercury, because I do make short form content over there in ASMR. So I would say check that out if you are interested, as well as follow us on DC Media Hub here at Riot Radio. And I think that is it for today. We've covered quite a bit, and I will see you next time.